You are now listening
to the Black Male Educators Alliance podcast.
Lifting our voices.
Lifting our voices.
All right, welcome everyone to the Lifting Our Voices podcast by BMEA Michigan. I am Michael Payne, and this is my co-host, Brandon Lane.
What's good, everybody?
Brandon, how you feeling?
I'm doing really well this morning. Excited to be here at the Michigan Reading Association Conference, and excited to have this dialogue with our guests this morning.
It's a wonderful guest that we have today. To my left here, I have Dr. Pamela Pugh, Vice President of the State Board of Education. Right. Next to me, I have Jametta Lilly. How you doing? CEO of Detroit Parent Network, right? Really excited to have you guys. This young man over here to my left, Jamarria Hall, OSU student and former DPSCD Alum, as well as Sharif Mekki, CEO of the Center of Black Educator Development. How you guys doing today?
We're doing fantastic.
Wow. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Good.
So glad you could be here, honestly.
Good, yeah. Really excited to engage in our conversation this morning again. And how you feeling? How's your time been at the conference thus far? Ms. Lilly, can we start with you?
Well, first off, I really just have to say how blessed I'm feeling.
Okay.
To be in the midst of other people who understand that literacy is liberation.
Right.
And just to be with other advocates who understand the critical role of literacy and that working together that we can make a difference, particularly with the lens on Black and brown children. So I'm just really delighted to be here.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mekki.
Yeah, no, I agree. Literacy is for liberation. I think everything's been well organized and taking care of folks. But I'm glad. It's my first time, but I'm glad it won't be my last time. So,
Nice.
This is dope. That's what's up.
Brother Hall?
Yeah, definitely. You can feel the energy within the atmosphere of powerful energy that something powerful is coming out of this conference, especially important conversations that need to be had, especially at this point in time right now, as we're going through a pandemic and trying to get back to normal. Definitely honored and blessed to be within this space, especially with so many profound people.
Nice. And Dr. Pugh?
It has been a great time, and it's just so great to be in the midst of just people who you read about, people who you look up to, and we had a great session this morning, but really just people who are able to connect the dots and look at some of the upstream factors that lead to the outcomes that we see, but are energized and able to do what we need to do towards the education and equitable education for our children.
Love it. Thank you. I'm just going to throw out like a general question to everyone, and that is, from your lens, how do you think literacy is equity justice? Who would like to start us off?
I'll start us off. First off, I think we should rephrase the question.
Okay.
How is literacy not kind of just because, if you're not literate, you can't be productive within society.
Period.
Not only that, you can't understand what's going on around you.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we see today a lot within our local communities of people not really understanding how something truly affects them. Not understanding how something or a policy affects your community, even if it may happen somewhere else. So just kind of understanding how important it is to be literate, especially in a nation where we haven't seen a fully literate nation. We still have so much advancement to do. We're truly living through a pandemic where we have no questions about how to really improve and to try to get back to normal. So again, like I said, it's kind of rephrasing, I guess, at this point, because it's been proven that we kind of know that this is important. It's essential to being not only productive to society, but at this point, being a human being.
Yeah. Thank you, brother. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think about, our ancestors, and I'm doing a lot more study of my ancestors and looking at my grandfather and those before who had to create schools to make sure that children had access to education, but then looking at those who lost their lives for us to be here and to make sure that we're carrying that on. So, and then looking at those who are yet fighting against our access to literacy. So we know that literacy is about justice.
Dates back to slavery, right? You know, it's legal for us to read. You know, our ancestors to read. So absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, I feel like I've been quoting Frederick Douglass all morning, but you know, I think one of his quotes is, you know, when that person learns how to read, they're unfit to be enslaved, and how that is still, you know, appropriate today.
Yeah.
You know, and just the orientation as far as like what doors are open when you're illiterate. You always have doors open, but some are opportunities and some are jail and morgues and frustration, and just like what that and then also just the self-determination that's tied to literacy. It's hard to be a self-determined human being if you're illiterate at the same time. And so like how that, you know, and that's why it centers liberation, because that self-determination is deeply entrenched within a realm of literacy.
That's a good point.
You know, in listening to our comments, I'm really reminded of, in some ways, we're talking about the principle of Sankofa, you know, which we know means to, as the Khan will remind us from West Africa, that it means to go back and fetch it. Dr. Pugh, you talked about thinking about your ancestors. You mentioned, Brother Sharif, about the importance of self-determination. And at some points, we've got to do more, I think, to hit pause and help more of our families, our parents, to understand how fundamental literacy and the pursuit of education has been endemic to people of African descent, but how critical it's been for where we are now and what we've come through. And I just kind of think that particularly it's useful for us to be thinking about this. And I'm so encouraged that even in this table right here, we've got multiple generations.
Absolutely.
And that's what's exciting. So we've got to learn from our past to use that to inform what we do now, so that we are carving a more just and equitable future for our children. And it's got to be, literacy has to be fundamental. It's equity, resources, and justice. And it's unacceptable any door that's closed to us that prevents it.
I really appreciate everyone's points and what's been shared. I think I want to make this point that there is a difference between initial literacy and functional literacy, which is really important, and that goes to your point around self-determination leading to liberation. It's not just okay for our kids to be able to read and write. They have to be able to take that information, and it should be anchored in direct application, right? So that they can be self-determined, which would lead to that liberation. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and I think, Ms. Lilly, we have our question. We can start off with you, because I think some of the things that you were saying kind of would segue pretty nicely, if that makes sense.
Happy to.
Just mentioning recently, you know, the pandemic that we're, you know, kind of currently in. How would you say, from the parent's perspective, COVID-19 has impacted this, you know, progress towards literacy justice for young students?
Okay. So if anything now, if parents didn't understand how important educators are and how important teachers are, they really do now. Because, you know, parents, and regardless of income, you know, so whether you are a single mom and you've got 3 children at home, the digital divide was real for you. Because perhaps you didn't have access to broadband. Perhaps you only had a little device like this and an old computer. On the other hand, you had, you know, middle income and higher income families that were still, all the kids had devices, but suddenly now they had to figure out this thing called Zoom, this thing called, you know, Microsoft Teams, and suddenly now have to have a whole new degree in how to do digital education. So in some ways, I think we've got a better understanding, parents do, about how important teachers are in the process. I think the other thing is that when we talk about literacy, is that we have to expand the conversation about literacy. And I so appreciate you making the point, this difference between just reading and comprehension, then comprehension to application. But I think the other part, and the reason I bring up the digital divide, because that is an equity and a justice issue too. And just really feel really pleased. You know, one of the spaces I'm in is as part of the governor's Racial Disparities Task Force, and I got a chance to head up some of our work on telehealth. Well, we were saying we can't talk about connecting kids to schools or connecting people to their physician or their behavioral health, you know, folks, unless we have digital literacy. So even if we have broadband, even if we have devices, but if you don't know how to use it. So I think we have more parents understanding and appreciating that literacy is on a lot of different levels. And I think maybe the last thing I would say is that, and I really appreciate, Jamarria, you said about reframing the question. I think we have to reframe the question when people saying get back to normal. Normal was never working for you know, Black, brown, and marginalized and low income children.
That's right.
Is, you know, and so I just want to say that. Yeah. And I think the more that we can have parents saying normal never worked. Yeah. We got to be at the table to help define what it should be. Yeah. And I think that besides the fact that many parents, quite frankly, like many of us, are exhausted and social emotionally been impaired through loss and grief. Even in that, though, there's opportunity for us to think differently about our future.
Absolutely. Just to connect on what you were saying about the, you know, what parents are seeing at home with the students doing virtual learning. I think as an educator and as a parent, the biggest thing I saw was that we weren't preparing our kids to be independent learners. So when you think about literacy, like, you need to be able to read to be able to do this independent work, right? When you don't have a parent that's able to help you while you're on the computer by yourself, you don't have a teacher who's over your shoulder. Now the onus of learning is on you, and we have not built that at all in none of our schools, right? That's not, everything is dependent on the adult to give this rote memorization to our students, this direct instruction to our students. We haven't built independent learners, and we haven't built free thinkers either. But I think this reset almost in the virtual learning gives us an opportunity to really reevaluate what do we bring back when we come back into this space.
I just want to invite either one of you to kind of maybe piggyback or add to what's been said so far. Any thoughts?
I think I do, but I want to hear that question one more time.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry. From the parents' perspective, how has COVID-19 impacted literacy for young students? And how would you suggest closing these gaps?
So I wouldn't speak from a parent's perspective because I'm not a parent, but I would like to use this time to think about how we have not adequately or equitably funded our schools. And so we're seeing things that we've cried out about for years as far as how one of our most precious infrastructures, and it's still right now today in 2022, is not being addressed as far as how do we address our school infrastructure and the inequitable funding of schools. And so we see now that we have a virus that's airborne, and we have schools that with windows that don't open, ventilation systems that may not exist, and if they have existed, haven't been addressed in decades. And those are in our schools, schools of children of color who have so many other things that they're having to deal with. And so we need to bring that to the forefront. And I think that we can make this connection, connecting the dots of how the environments where children spend the most of their day, most hours of their day, have been neglected, and how we have to fight to make sure that those environments are addressed and that they're up to par, just like children who don't look like them. We want that same type of environment, and we do have this opportunity with the funding that we have now. The governor here, Michigan's governor, Whitmer, has proposed a budget that would address the infrastructure issues, some of the COVID relief dollars. We also have to make sure we have the experts to be able to address these buildings, but we have to have the political will, and we have to have the push and the backing of parents and others.
I think that, again, these segues are perfect. This is what I like, you know. We were considering some of the proposals, you just brought them up, around, you know, getting some of our trusted partners in the classroom, and then also the proposal around the financial incentive for educators for the next 3 years. How do you think both of those, in addition to that proposal, the one around advocating for more mental health essential workers to be in the classroom, how do you think both of those support this idea of literacy as equity justice for our students?
If you're asking me, they're all no-brainers. I mean, these are things that we were fighting for years ago. Unfortunately, we saw the Flint water crisis, and some of these things were able to be implemented in Flint. But we were talking about that before when we were talking about the what was it, the children's health care. Yeah. And so it is a must. We have to look at the mental health. We know that many of our schools, when we saw the clinics in our schools, we saw children showing up at school more often. We know that children and their families, in many cases, were able to have issues that were addressed. And so we know if children are able to show up for school, then they're able to better perform in school. For those of us coming from the public health realm, they're just they're no-brainers. They should have happened before, and now they are beyond a necessity and an urgency.
Oh yeah. Anyone interested in adding to that point? Because I wanted to pull you in, Jamarria, if you will.
Yeah, definitely. Not specifically on that point, but just speaking. As we've been going through a pandemic, as we are in a pandemic, we have to understand that there's been way before just us as Black people have been deprived of education. Us as people were deprived of education. Understanding that when there were kings and queens back in the days, that the masses weren't able to be educated at all areas. Even when we were in our African heritage, some of us still weren't able to be educated at that time. So understanding how important education is, but understanding that there's been a long-lasting pandemic way before receiving this pandemic here.
Okay.
Understanding that youth are mental health professionals. Understanding that youth need to be involved in what is going on with education and the rollout of it. Not only that, youth need to get paid. Some serious stuff. You need to get paid. And we need to build better pipelines to get this going. Especially since now we're looking at this pandemic and we're talking about policies. You need to be involved in policies.
Absolutely.
These policies are being made for them and about them.
Absolutely.
So they need to be a part of the rollout of these policies and of the creation of these policies, not just when the conversation is done or not just when it's just upright wrong.
Yeah. And the ideation stage, absolutely. It brings me to my question. We know that you are a part of the right to literacy lawsuit, and just kind of bringing that, on the table. And how for you did the ruling affirm the right to literacy justice, if that makes sense?
The ruling was one thing. I mean, us as people, we often know we're right. So I didn't need the court system to tell me that I was right to feel that I was right. So I understood when I first knew that something was wrong within my classroom, and I'm seeing my community being deprived of opportunity. That something is wrong, and that it starts with education. Even a lot of times, like I know I just said this last session, but a lot of times we separate a lot of different things when at the same time, especially for youth, they're all one and the same thing. And they all have the same origin of either oppression or upheld. So understanding that from that standpoint as a young adult, it was tough. I mean, it is, especially for children today still, as of now, understanding that this is something, even after the ruling, got embarked. Something that I've never heard of, even though I'm not a lawyer, but I know it's something that's very, very rare. And that rarely happens. So knowing that I wasn't just fighting or trying to change or get to be able to read or write. I wanted opportunity. I wanted to be heard. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to make change. And not to open doors or to close doors, but to tear down walls, to tear down all these barriers. Who said that crabs had to be in a barrel? Who makes the curriculum or the basis that says that I'm proficient or unproficient? Who are these people? What are these tests that are telling me that I'm unproficient in learning? These are things that I knew. I didn't need a courthouse to tell me or a judge to rule in my favor to understand that. Even if he didn't, what's happened before then, we still knew it.
Thoughts, feelings?
I just got it. So Jamarria, just so appreciative of the passion, the depth of your reflection, and your asserting your power. because that's the kind of development that we need to have for our young people. And maybe some of us at the table, some of the people maybe in the audience, have had experiences of students who saw injustice and changed it. Just the other day, some of us were joking. We found ourselves in a group of Cass Tech students, and in the process, I was laughing at. So, I was part of the one that shut down the high school so we could get Black Studies, and yes, they called the police on us. But I'm sharing that to say that there's that legacy, and what I'm looking forward to, and what I'm excited about is hearing. What we've got to make sure is what you're sharing, that more of our students hear. Because there's so much that says to us that we cannot create change, and change doesn't happen in tsunamis, except when it came to COVID. That was like a tsunami. Right. Learning loss, tsunami. But change is generally incremental. It can be big, but it's still generally incremental, and that we have to be ready for the long haul of justice. I remember Uncle used to say, justice is a 1,000-year war. So we're in a 1,000-year war for this. And so it can't be for the faint-hearted. But I just really want to congratulate you. I was so delighted when that ruling finally came through, but I hadn't had a chance to hear you articulate it. And so I hope those of us that are in the generations that are older and listening to you, I just really want to affirm you, as well as others that are hearing the work. And for the educators at the table, isn't that exciting?
Very
so
much
this
so.
is exactly.
This is an example.
This is the example of why. This is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about. There's a whole bunch of ancestors, aunties, grandmas, and grandpas that are proud of all of us in the work that we do, because this is serious. This is a struggle that this nation has to go through. And if I could just say one thing, and I'll stop. This nation has never been about equity, whether it was Black folk or white folk. So let's understand, when we look at the history of Europe, Europeans were never about everybody being educated. The industrialists, the capitalist industrialists who built this nation off the backs of Black people and slavery, the Chinese and every other group have never been about equity when it comes to public education. It's a relatively new phenomenon. And it's a phenomenon that some would have go backwards, burn books, so on and so forth. So I think contextually we just need to be aware of how deep the issue is, and how pervasive it is.
I think it's so interesting. I think we all can agree that fighting for the right equitable education is activism, right? And then even just from your experience, you observed a wrong in your life, in the life of others around you, and you decided to act on that. And I wanted to bring it to you, Brother Sharif, so like I said, I think being an educator, being a Black educator is activism, right? Specifically, how important is literacy in this space of activism, right? And what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's essential. It's inextricably linked, between the activism and literacy. And I think, there's so much that's been said already, but, Maya Angelou, used to talk about we should bring that same energy that we would have, that we brought and we would bring to end enslavement, to ending illiteracy. That's the level of urgency and vigor. And relentlessness, and you often don't feel that's what's happening, right? And I 100% agree. There has been a long history of Europeans surf. You surf. I'm I'm here. You're there. You're only on this land, right? We just see that is a pretty pervasive and deep legacy to try to untangle, and people talk about reimagining and building something that that's not just words. We literally have to build something that was not, experienced in mass. We can look across the country. There's not a single city that they can say all of our Black and brown children are being educated well. Not a single city. You'll see schools, you'll see classrooms, you'll see pockets, but not a single place. And so then when I just think about, just this idea of how important it is when we look at folks like the Black Panther Party, right? Everybody look at the shotgun and the beret and the black leather. No, look at their food program and look at their literacy program. Look at that and see what they were thinking about. And 60 community-based programs, health, education is one of the 10-point 10 points on the 10-point platform, right? Is education and how important and essential they view that. You know, folks showing up, I want to be part. Political education, right? Which means you have to be literate. Here's what we're reading.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely crucial. And we see with SNCC, you know, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, right? Like, you know, the founder of Freedom School in this version of it. And Dr. Carter said we've always had freedom schools. If they were underground, if they were in the forest, like whatever, like we've always had freedom schools. But when that version of it that SNCC was doing in Mississippi, that came from an activist, right? SNCC was there to register people to vote. And Charlie Cobb, who was on his way to a core meeting in Texas, a meeting about a meeting, right? Like he was going to meet about activism. And he's like, but I got to stop in Mississippi because they doing all this crazy stuff in one of the most dangerous places in America for Black people to be vocal activists, right? And they're like, bruh, you going to a meeting about the work? Like, come do the work. So he ended up staying in Mississippi, right? But his memo, and you can see his memo online. They have it digitized on SNCC's website. Writing a letter saying, like, I know we're registering folks to vote. We need it, but they're also not getting an education. They're being miseducated, diseducated, and so we should do something for their children and grandchildren, right? And so registering to vote is a form of activism, right? But also, so is literacy. And so Freedom School was started in that context, in the midst of that Freedom Summer and registering to vote. They're like, oh yeah, we got to start schools, under trees, in churches, in people's homes, on the lawn. Like that is you know, just a critical critical element.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because I do think when she mentioned, you know, reaching back and fetching, right? This concept of us as a community starting schools and like using that as like this push to move us forward in terms of where we are in society. I wanted you to talk a little bit about your new partnership with New Paradigm and the Freedom Schools Literacy Academy. Explain that to our audience.
Yeah. I mean, really excited to launch Freedom School Literacy Academy. And as when Charlie Cobb started, you know, SNCC had a version. Mama Marion Wright Edelman from Children's Defense Fund, Philadelphia Freedom School. Like every community has kind of taken and shaped Freedom Schools to fit the needs that they saw in their community. Well, we're looking at it as Freedom School Literacy Academy as a teacher pipeline. You know, like how do we help expose early exposure, clinical experience for Black youth, Black high school, Black college youth to teach first, second, and third graders, but grounded in literacy, positive racial identity development, and educational activism. Right, and so those are like kind of the three components that come together. And so what we have is in FSLA, Freedom School Literacy Academy, they're receiving coaching, their observations, they're recorded, they practice, right? Like they all of this kind of rigorous intellectual work, being led by our staff and including, you know, like just giants in the field like Dr. Greg Carr out of Howard University. And so they teach in the morning, but then in the afternoon they're doing the coursework, so to speak, right? Like probing mindsets, reading articles, looking at lesson plans, exchanging and polishing these lesson plans, and most importantly, practicing. What is great, and saying like, hey, here's what the dopest teachers do, and allowing Black high school and college youth to practice, but practice within their communities and doing it with first, second, and third graders. So we've just seen, you know, last year we had 99 apprentices, and we have both an in-person and virtual version. We had 99 apprentices last year, high school and college, across 14 states, but we're really excited to be in Detroit in person. So that'll be Philly, Camden, and Detroit in person. And it's intergenerational, which is how we've always learned. That's how we've always passed down information. And now you see like how much information is, access is thwarted, and so to be able to provide this, it's fantastic, so really excited and about
Sharif, you mind me asking which schools are you working with?
So we're looking. We haven't landed on the elementary school. The high school students can be from anywhere, right? So we have high school students from anywhere, college students from anywhere, and we're trying to land on the actual elementary school in Detroit that we will, will be in. So And then what's supposed our model is, so that's happening, and then over the next year, hopefully we'll have it after school. So Freedom School Literacy Academy is out of school time. And these are paid apprenticeships, right? We're not getting paid. We're not asking high school, so hey, go volunteer and learn how to. No. Okay, we have a
my
stipend.
life doesn't support that.
Exactly.
The free
We have a stipend.
internships.
But if you're interested in kids and interested in educational activism, like, hey, instead of McDonald's, how about you come teach this first grade? Mary Church Terrell, one of those Black Educator Hall of Famers, used to talk about lift as you climb. And that's what educators do. So that's what we're about, lifting as we climb, and we're doing it intergenerational. First, second, and third graders, who some of them say, I never had a Black teacher before. Well, there's a college kid, he ain't even a teacher yet, but I understand exactly what they're saying, and we're just, what impact is that going to have with that child later on? But then the high school and college students who are, and so far, we started in 2019. We have 24 Black youth who came through our program who are now employed in schools.
Oh, wow.
Right, and so we're talking about like using the FSLA as a rebuilding a national Black teacher pipeline. And then that's coupled with, so the out of school time is coupled with a teacher academy. So during high school, instead of taking an elective course in, Eastern European philosophy, you can take a course in teaching. Teaching 101 from a Black pedagogical framework and a Black historical lens.
Nice.
And what people seem to miss, we have a teacher shortage. We also have a lack of Black male educators, right? Only 2%. You can't be what you can't see. Right? Representation matters. So it seems so common sense. Like I didn't know that I could be an educator until I went to an all Black HBCU, all men, and I saw those Black educators and I saw the talent and success. And what you're doing here, not only are you building more community, right? Because now we have connections between high school and middle school, and it's all tied around academic excellence. But you are showing these kids that this is an option. Now I can teach. I can teach. I got paid to do it, to work with kids. I like working with kids. Like so many people haven't realized that education hasn't even been in front of any Black boy's face as an opportunity. I didn't have any Black male educators K through 12. So why would I think about being a teacher, right? So then we create our own problems because we haven't thought about it from the lens of the Black and brown students that we serve. And I don't say we, but you know what I mean, as a general space. So,
and I like raising the respect of the profession because we know, all of us, especially those of us who come from the South, it was such a respectable profession. And what happened? And we know that someone today, in the conversation that we had today, said that it's the most important profession, and we do understand that. So how did we get to where we are today, where teachers are feeling so disrespected, and rightfully so, but to have programming as well as the Black male educators to be able to raise that awareness around the respect and the value of educators, and particularly Black male educators, is so necessary now.
And I was just pointing out, it's not a new phenomenon.
Right.
Like, and so when we talk about this, and we talk about, after, during Reconstruction, how 5,000 Black schools were created, and I remember reading in the Education of Black People in the South.
We were just talking.
I was just about to bring that up. I was just about to bring that up. Oh my God!
And that's one of them, right?
Yes.
And just how many of them had to build their own schools, right? Like they were paying the taxes for white schools that they couldn't go to. And they had to build their own schools.
Oh my goodness.
But, one of the stories, and you're talking like community and families, and just like everybody realizing this was a central part of that liberation. And, they were talking about building a school, and they didn't have any money. But they were coming together and pooling their resources, bringing their oxen to fell trees and all this kind of stuff. And I remember one of the stories, this older woman came to the meeting, old lady, you know what I mean, and said, I don't have anything but this copper penny. And it's for the education of Black children. Like, I'm like, dang. Like, if she had her, like a penny and said, this is for my children, not my children, right?
But our children.
Our children's education. Like, if that ain't the central, call out and clarion call.
Absolutely. And that's eye-opening, because it wasn't until my adult life that I realized that my aunt and uncles, one of the first schools that they went to was the Pugh School. That's my last name.
Oh, wow.
And that was because that's what they did. They made sure that they built in that community a school for their children, as well as the children around to have somewhere to go, because they knew that's how important education was.
Yeah, this legacy, I can almost feel the energy around the table. We all kind of feel like we almost could levitate. So I'm the proud granddaughter of Viola DeWalt, who in LaPorte, Texas, created a one-room schoolhouse, and that both my aunt and my mom went to. And both of them went on to become graduates of Texas Southern University and Hampton University. And I tell that in the same kind of story because the reality is, and I think it was Hakeem Madhubuti, some of you know him as a poet, Don L. Lee. He reminds us that if you can control the image, absolutely, you control the mind. So we have been fed images, and we have embraced images that, quite frankly, work to our detriment. So we embrace things that are presented to us by folks who have another corporate agenda, who have another agenda of oppression, versus self-sufficiency, versus love, versus education. And that's why I think we have such an exciting opportunity. Well, I'm so excited about our conversation here, because we're talking about, as both educators or people who care about children and our future, is how do we reframe our institutions and our relationship with community and parents, and so that we are presenting a different alternative way of thinking about education to our children. So it's really education for liberation, but building on, as you said, so when you talked about SNCC and all that, we actually know it goes much further. And so we could talk about, so at some point, Mississippi or places like that, it didn't matter. You came in off the field, out of the fields, and Grandmama said, "Boy, go get me that Bible." Grandma could not read. So I reject this notion how educators often say about our parents, well, they can't teach people how to read because they don't know how to read. I said, excuse me. It's the value of reading. It's the value of education. So I just think that as we talk to our families, that we don't denigrate them, because some of them are not educated. Some of them are functional literate. So let's own that. Let's love and support them. But, I often like to say, you don't have to be a scientist to raise the next astronaut.
That's right.
And so when we believe in that again,
absolutely,
and we show that to our children, it just changes everything. Absolutely, it changes everything.
Can I real quick? Go ahead. So it's called The Education of the Blacks in the South. I was itching to make this point, and really it draws a connection. It chronicles basically education for Black people in the South, and you can make connections to why today's education system functions and produces the outcomes that it produces. Specifically, Mike and I were talking about this just this morning about how General Samuelson of the Hampton Normal School, essentially, it was about control. Every person that comes through our school, we want to control every minute of their day. We want to put them through the same repetitive curriculum, and it's a facade. Some of the children who were enrolling in those vocational programs, blacksmiths, one of the reports, an indictment against the school, was a young man. He said, I've been doing this for 3 years and I have yet to learn how to cut leather or how to mold a shoe. How can I get a job as a blacksmith and I've never done one particular thing to help me become a blacksmith? And I think about the classroom today. In some ways, when we put a worksheet and an assignment in front of my students, because honestly, I've done some of those things. I've failed some of my kids in my past because I didn't put them in position to have direct application of their learning. You know what I'm saying? Didn't put them in positions to have partnerships with businesses, but when I was put in the position to give them opportunities to connect with the community and businesses, that's exactly what I did, because we need to position our children to not only learn the content, but again, have this direct application of knowledge for themselves. And this is a tremendous book. We agree that educators alike, but specifically educators of color, Black and brown, men and women, should definitely be reading books of this nature. and the
not
like.
just them, but
And the like.
programs,
And
right?
the like.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
yes.
prep programs.
Professors should
Absolutely.
be like understanding this
Absolutely.
and then
Yes.
using
Absolutely.
this and like, oh, wait a minute, like
Absolutely.
because it's not just who's leading the classroom, it's who
Yes.
prepared them. To lead the
Educator prep
classroom.
program.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right, who prepared them, and that's absolutely a critical piece that needs far more attention, scrutiny, and
Historical
accountability.
context.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Like historical context is so important for people to come into Black and brown communities and think they're going to teach children without understanding the culture. When people learn through culture,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna get to that point about like where schools are now. But she said something earlier about functioning literate, like right. And then I read it somewhere like functioning is just a term we use for people who can still contribute to a capitalistic society. So when I think about schools, right, we send our kids to schools just learn just enough that you can be a good worker, right?
That's
But our Black schools don't have anything where they're learning about being political activists. They don't learn about the economics, right? So you can
Conflict is
spend.
educated. It's educated out of curriculum. I mean, I don't know if I'm saying it the right way, but there's
you
no
are.
such way.
You are.
There's nothing about how you have conflict, how you deal with tension, how you deal with change. Most scientists really have stolen some ideas from other people, or there was a tremendous amount of conflict in discovery of
Yes,
new
yes,
initiatives,
yes,
technology,
yes.
whatever you want to call it. But we don't really talk about or position our students to engage in conflict for liberation, if that makes sense.
Marginalized people, you don't want to give them the tools to uprise.
Wow.
So,
Right.
you know what I mean? The honest truth.
Nobody's going to give you the education to overthrow them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's
That's
Asada,
right. That's right.
Mama Asada.
And if I could just add, it is a race piece, and it's also class.
For sure.
Yes.
So just as a quick analogy, I mean, because we were talking about historic figures, so it doesn't have to be who was right. Was Booker T right to say Tuskegee, get a skill and then apply it, or Du Bois said no, we need to focus on our higher learning intellectuals? No, it's all of that.
Yes, right.
It's all
right,
of that.
right.
It's a third one, Marcus
Right.
Garvey.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Trying to flatten the Black liberation movement to this person versus that one. Which one do you side?
And they
matter
continue
of fact,
to-
I just on Philly 7th Ward, we just posted a piece. One of the teachers at the school I worked at, she used to be an architect. She decided to go back to school to be a teacher, and we were fortunate enough to hire her as Africana Studies teacher. And she brings this up, Booker, and kids have to debate.
Yeah.
Booker, Marcus, and WB, and what they realize at the end is you need all three.
Yeah.
That's
Like,
right.
you need all three, and don't let them for a second tell you which one you should be
need to
listening
align
to,
with.
because all three are part of
Yeah.
this liberatory movement, and you being able to have a fuller understanding
Yeah.
of what's happening. Right? You can do all of that kind of stuff, but if you don't have a sense of identity,
Yes.
then you're going to be lost. You can have the skill, but if you don't have that kind of political education, then that's going to be lost, right? Like, and so all of that is combined.
I'm so sorry. I know. I'm
Yeah, you've
so
been too
young.
quiet, bro. Get
I'm
in
so
there.
young, man.
No, you
We
good.
talk about political. We're talking about capitalism. I mean, we're talking about education at the end of the day. So, what is education supposed to do? Once you are educated, I don't need to make this decision for you. You're making this decision on your own. Once you're educated, you're supposed to be able to make money because you have knowledge to be able to do a skill that can earn you money. At this point, we are going to school just to earn or to get a job. When people think about literacy, or when people was thinking of the right to the literacy case, they were thinking about kids being able to write and fill out a job application. That's what it was. Oh, these kids can't even fill out a job application. They can't read the job application and fill out to go work at McDonald's. So when we think about the perception of education as it is today, to think about that, we only need to produce people that can go make money or go do things of that nature.
Yeah, just the
We are fitting into that system.
Yeah.
That even thinking about politically, that we are setting children up to fail.
for sure.
Thinking that you're going to go to school and school has the best for you. Thinking that politically, someone has the best, like you just said, for you at stake in your own community. There's no thing as Democrats or Republicans. They're politicians. Like, there's no different, like, so many times we try to separate things, but like we're talking about, they are all one and the same. So once you become educated within yourself, a lot of us aren't even educated. We don't even know who we are. We still are lost because we think that we are found. Just by you believing that you are there, believing that you are proficient in the system of today that evaluates proficiency. we are lost.
And to your point, because I'm connecting it to Ms. Dr. Pugh's point too, why don't kids want to be educators? They're not blind to what's happening in the school.
Right.
They feel it.
Right.
I know you're being disingenuous. Right. You know that this work is not giving me anything. Right. You know this is not going to free me. Right. Why would I want to be you? Right?
Yeah.
When I decided to be an educator, it's because I went into schools and I saw, like, after the fact, like, wow, we are really failing the babies. I was blessed that I had the right support system around me to get past in spite of, but we not doing the right thing to make kids get to where I got to, you know what I mean, in that space. So I was like, I need to go back and do the right thing. But no one would want to be an educator in this system. Yeah. If they're really trying to liberate kids, we're not liberating children. Especially he's passed out worksheets just like I passed out worksheets and felt bad about it because what else? What am I supposed to really be doing? Right. I'm lying to their face.
Right. Well, you know, and you all cut this part of the podcast out if you need to, but you know, we got to talk about politics.
Yeah,
we do.
We got to talk about policymakers, and you bring it up. Others have used
they have
the
their
word.
hands in other people's pockets, right?
And all the things that we're talking about, and everyone has said this, they're not just happening. It didn't just stop with the Emancipation Proclamation and Reconstruction. Remember, there was that redemption period, Jim Crow, and we're still trying to beat back Jim Crow. Someone brought up earlier the internalized portions of that, but those politicians that are in place right here in Michigan that are still pushing that agenda and are being very successful. So these things that we're talking about is not teachers that don't want to teach. It's not, you know, local communities in many cases that don't want to value teachers. It's just this cyclical system that we're in that's being perpetuated by the political system that we continue to be in. You know, and I'll just bring this up because we can't not recognize that there are people who are pulling these books off the shelves that we're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
You know, pulling our history off the shelves so we don't know about Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, all of it. And just Saturday, Donald Trump was in South Carolina and pulled a clarion call out, you know, lay down your life. To make sure that CRT, and we know what CRT means, it's not critical race theory, it's our history, and those books that tell not only our children and help our children to know our history and how we overcame and how we don't go back, but, you know, also telling all children about our ugly past, but also, you know, how we've overcome. And so we have to talk about the politics, and we have to, as people who are concerned about public education, educators know that there is a political system that is so set against us being free through literacy and education. So I just want to
I don't think you said anything that
we gonna keep it.
That we should turn anything out. No, because anything that has to do with freedom is inherently political.
Yeah.
And I purposely a little ago I said, you know, you have the issues, you know that principle dichotomy of race and class. So the reality is that you can't keep white supremacy going when white people understand their real history, and you can't keep black victimization when you understand our real history.
Absolutely.
So the game has to be played to keep everybody in their place.
That's right.
So it's up to us collectively to bust that up. And part of that means, yes, having a real focus on who we are and building up the strategies for black liberation on a systems level, and at the same time saying to white folks, you know, you've been given a band of crap too. So how do we then collectively make sure that we are creating a better pathway where people are liberated in general? And see, and if we even go back to Brother King or others, you know, when they began to have a conversation about going across race and class issues, then we got to get rid of you. So, you know, Malcolm started talking about, okay, it's an international issue, we got to get rid of it.
What's his name?
When Patrice Lumumba said, I want to reach out and let's take this to the UN, we got to get rid of you. So, you know, it's to recognize, I think, and for our families to recognize that we have so much in our history, but we have things right now that we have to address the political issue and organize strategically to identify those people who are not working in our interest, and for those who are, that we coalesce around them. Not that we go along with everything that they're saying, but if you're offering me an opportunity, or if there's a budget item that's going to help our community, then we need to make sure that happens. Because I'm just going to say it, we cannot afford to just say, I want to wash my hands of that. No, we have to be in this mix and build coalitions, build strategies to get the resources that we need that will educate and help us create the kind of liberation, not only for our children, but for this entire nation, which is more than an ocean to say.
I mean, you both speak of a couple of points that reminds me of. So, like Dr. Howard Fuller talks about this story where people were, even after enslavement, they were liberated but not yet free. Because freedom is back to that self-determination and being able to decide this is what I want to do. And a big part of literacy, part of education, is to also be a critical thinker. Right? And this is like, if you're not able to think critically, if no one showed you like the discipline, rigorous discipline that it takes to think critically, and this is why teaching truth is so important, right? You know, like that, all of this that is connected beyond enslavement, right? Talking about like Sankofa, like, because again, as you know, Dr. Carr teaches our high school students, like, don't ever let them talk to you about your history started with enslavement.
Yes, exactly.
Because if that's true, then everything else is paradigm. Like everything is a come up after that, and it's like you're not going to be able to be a fully seasoned critical thinker if you're unable to connect the dots with capitalism, with racialized capitalism, on top of that genocide, history of Europe, history of like what all of this means in the context of, you know, today. And you know, and I meant to say this earlier this morning and I got distracted, but the two things when I first became a principal that I asked the staff to stop saying is, one, get your education and get out. Because I was hearing that. And I'm like, what are you saying about that child's grandmother? Like but it told me, like, you have no idea about this community, the history of this community, the contributions of all of that. And the second thing is, you know, they would ask them about what they wanted to be when they grow up, but it was in the context of who you going to work for. In the education, who you going to work for. Like, I'm like, no, they're actually going to employ people. You know, like, start asking them the question of, what questions do you want to solve? What problems do you want to address? What do you want to build? And then figure out, when you hear that, then you can say, all right, here's the education we're going to help you with, because you've laid out, this is the problem I want to solve. You know, and if that is how we approach education, then we would be doing it from a very different paradigm.
So how do we clone you as a principal? we've got to do this. So we've got to clone Jamarria. Okay, we got to clone Brother Sharif.
So really quickly, the sake of time, we're going to have to start to land this plane. But Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade, he says it's not about escaping the community, but ending the injustice and closing the gaps for Black and brown children. I'm paraphrasing some of what he says, but you just make me think of that point. And Mike, I don't know, brother, if you have some closing thoughts.
It sounds like we need a second podcast. So I'm gonna call everybody. We're gonna get back together because we have so much more to discuss. But I do want to give some space for our audience to ask a few questions to our great panelists. So if anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and speak now. I know it's a lot, so go ahead and take some time, think time. You gotta give your kids think time.
I have a question. How can we stay in contact with you all to find out where you all are and maybe what your next steps and moves are? I know you're talking about coming to Detroit. You know, how can we find out, you know, what you all are doing and just kind of stay up to date?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, you guys definitely share your information, your social medias. Go ahead.
Yeah.
And brother, you don't know it, but we're going to do a program, and you're going to be talking to Detroit parents about what you're doing. So I get that. Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
because our families need to know these kind of options. More of our families need to know that their students can have the wherewithal to create change. So I just want to keep lifting that up.
I'll say our organization is on all their social media platforms. We have a monthly newsletter that we just started a couple months ago. So if you sign up on our website, the center, blacked.org, you know, you'll get monthly updates. At least next week we have a webinar on the 23rd, I think 12 p.m. Eastern. We did a partnership with Donors Choose, and where we did a survey and ended up being 1,600 male educators of color that we were able to that participated. But we're teasing out the Black men in that in that survey and their experience, and we'll have a webinar next week. And so we're constantly going to just keep sharing information and resources and things through our website. I mentioned Philly 7th Ward. It's a collection of Black folks. People like, oh, it's Philly 7th Ward. We named it Philly 7th Ward because W.B. Du Bois was at Penn and doing this sociological study, first of its kind. Mind you, he working for Penn, but he couldn't have an office.
No.
Campus, right? So, but he divided up the city in wards, and the 7th ward was where most of the Black folks was, the most populated with Black people. And so we named it that, but that's where, this high school teacher, Miss Henry, is talking about, things like, this is how I teach my students about these 3 giants and what their framing was and how it helps them, moving forward. So between the center and Philly 7th Ward is where, where most of our work is kind of, centered.
Anyone else can share their information where you can find you?
If you go to the rightoliteracy.com, at least a little information online is there. I'm also on social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. So just definitely open to feel free to reach out. Definitely very active within Detroit, but definitely traveling as of right now, just trying to get to where the action is at this point. And
just for the sake of making things a little more
blast it
streamlined,
out.
we'll just share out everyone's contacts, social media, etc., so that you can just one-stop shop to be able to reach out to and stay up to date with what everyone's endeavors are at the moment. So.
Yeah. And I would just say, like you both mentioned, we do these series, Black Educator Hall of Famers, to uplift who these folks are. You both mentioned family members, so I'm hoping to get that because, that's part of our series of just letting people know, like, hey, here are folks that actually built schools, created frameworks, educated thousands, all of that. But it's not lost, but it needs to be unearthed. We need to fetch it. And my friend Chris Stewart talks about this Black educational capital.
Yes.
That we need to kind of regain and pull together. So.
Absolutely. And not be afraid to talk about education and the pursuit of excellence. Again, the majority society has suggested to us that we shouldn't be about that. So if you become this or that, record, you can become a billionaire, or certainly at least a millionaire, as an entertainer, and it has nothing to do with education. So the images that we have been presented have limited us, and to the point, and we all know this reality is that we have to talk about that, post-traumatic slave mentality.
Oh yes, post-traumatic.
That says that you think you're smart. So instead of lifting you up, we do the opposite. And so those are some of the internal conversations that we cannot be afraid to say that need to happen in our communities, because they limit the possibilities that we have. And then I just want to say how much I am so delighted, feel so privileged, and then we had a great time talking about HB. I'm a Spelman woman. The impact of HBCUs. That's right. And we could just have a whole conversation there about the
we start the conversation with Cheney University, though.
Well, only because my uncle attended Cheney, I agreed to that.
First HBCU,
but we have to talk about. It starts and begins with Morehouse.
I'm going to tell y'all, the HBCU would be Florida A&M.
There you go, FAMU, we understand.
Dr. Pugh started our conversation when we met a couple of weeks ago. Oh, God. We have to forgive her for that one. Spelman sister? Okay, nice to meet you, my dear.
It starts and begins with Cass.
Well, see, here else was other funny. Don't you love it when you're somewhere like in Michigan and the U of M and the MSU people start going like, excuse me, I'm HBCU. Who else is? And so then after a minute, because they'll only maybe usually a couple of raisins in the oatmeal in those kind of settings, And it just does something in the room when those people who made a decision to go to a historically black college or university stand up. And I'm not negating the value of Wayne State University, University of Michigan, and so on and so forth. But we have to be willing to talk about our excellence and to let it shine and let others know about it. If nothing else, we have our own fun internally, which speaks to culture.
And the next generation is going to say, who went to a freedom school?
Exactly. I love it.
So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pugh.
Shout out to BMEA.
Yes, thank you. We're officially closing out the Listen Our Voices BMEA Podcast. Thank you, everyone, for talking with us today.
Yes,
Appreciate you.
We had a great time.
You are now listening
to the Black Male Educators Alliance podcast.
Lifting our voices.
Lifting our voices.